So Lisa, why don't you go ahead and take us live if you haven't already?
Yep, we are now live on YouTube.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I know we'll have folks joining us as we go, but welcome everybody to this 2021 Budget Town Hall for the Hunter Mill District. I am Walter Alcorn, the Hunter Mill District Supervisor, and I'm joined tonight by Christina Jackson, who's the Director of our Department of Management and Budget. Christina, thank you much for joining us this evening. We do have well, we're again still trying to mimic real in-person meetings. And as we do this online, I know it sometimes feels like we've always been doing it this way, but we really haven't. But what we are able to do is to let people interact directly with both Christina and with me, and to provide ask your questions, and also to provide immediate comments and to get immediate feedback. So welcome everybody again to this FY 2022 virtual town hall. So we were going to have our school board member from the Hunter Mill District, Melanie Marin, join us. However, she's not able to attend this tonight, but we can forward school board related questions to her. So we're going to go through, first of all, get an overview tonight from Christina Jackson of the FY 2022 proposed budget. Then we will open it up to questions. So before questions and comments, before we do that though, let's do a review of how you can participate in the meeting today. Jose, do you want to walk us through? And this is Jose Del Cid from the Hunter Mill office. Jose, show us. Ooh, that's really interesting. Okay, tell us what to do if we want to ask a question or make a comment.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. There's multiple ways you can provide feedback during the meeting. One is by raising your virtual hand, so not your physical hand here, but so at the bottom of your participants pane, so you want to make sure that this icon right here with the person holding like 3 plates that says participants is in blue or highlighted. You should have a list of the panelists, so you'll see the Hunter Mill office as well as Christina Jackson. Below, you'll see the attendees, but right below the view all attendees icon is this little hand raise. So if you look at my name right now, it says Jose Del Cid, and if I click this little hand, it says raise hand. Now there's a hand raise, and that's one of the best ways to make sure that we get a chance to go around the virtual room and get everyone's feedback and questions. The second way is through the chat feature. So again, you want to make sure that the chat icon is highlighted in a blue, and you can send it to all the panelists. You could, it's preferred to actually send it to all the panelists. So you would just select all panelists and then just type in your question or your comment there. So those are 2 quick, easy ways to provide us feedback, questions, and comments during the meeting.
Great. And Jose, also, could you let folks know if they want to both show the video or show themselves on video or just audio?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's, so you would raise your hand, and during the meeting, Lisa will be noticing through the attendee list who has their hand raised and muting and unmuting. So if you have your hand raised, that's the quick and easiest way for us to get you unmuted so you can provide questions during the meeting.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jose, for walking through that. And if anyone has questions, feel free to go into the chat and send a question to Jose, or I guess you could send it to everybody too, and Jose will respond. But also, before I turn it over to Christina Jackson for an overview of the budget, I also want to, in addition to Jose Del Cid, who's in the Hunter Mill office, also want to introduce several other folks who make everything work. First of all, Lisa Connors is here as well. Hello, Lisa. And Paul Davis is here. Hi, Paul. And Paul's actually in the office. I'm in my home basement, but I see where you are, Paul. Thank you. And Shamily Houth is here as well. Hi, Shamily. And Gwen Menton also is here. So hello, Gwen. Fantastic. So for those of you watching who have had any issues with the Hunter Mill office, call the office, maybe even send an email. My bet is you've interacted with at least one of these wonderful folks. So thank you to everybody in the office who's here tonight. And just a couple of other announcements before I turn it over to Christina. Just a reminder, this is being recorded and the recording will be posted on my webpage tomorrow. And also there'll be links in the newsletter and social media accounts. So just FYI for that. And I'd also ask that if you can, please try to limit your questions or comments to 2 minutes. And we also want to make sure that we respect everybody's time here. This is not by any means the only opportunity to provide input on the budget. This will be detailed in the newsletter that we send out. And I guess the main point I would note in terms of additional opportunities to participate in the process in a live way is through the virtual public hearings, which will be taking place on April 13th through 15th. And all this information will be included. We'll repeat it later at the end of the meeting and also be included in the newsletter. So anything else, Lisa, Jose, Paul, Shanley, Gwen, before I turn it over to Christina? All right, I am muting myself. And Christina, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I believe that Jose is going to share some slides. Perfect. Yes, my name is Christina Jackson. I am the director of the county's Department of Management and Budget, and thank you for having me this evening. So I have 10 slides to go over tonight. These were pulled from the county executive's longer presentation on February 23rd. So certainly if you're more interested in seeing the full presentation, that is available online at the website that you see at the bottom, fairfaxcounty.gov/budget. I would say there's a lot of really useful information on the website. A document that I always like to point people to is our advertised budget summary, which is linked on our 22 advertised budget page. It just provides a really good overview of all of the adjustments that we've included in the budget. And so, you know, if you are curious about a specific item that I talk about tonight, the advertised budget summary is probably a good place to start. So if we can turn to the next slide, just want to provide a little bit of context behind the 22 advertised budget. You know, certainly as we were entering this budget cycle, we felt that the conservative posture that we took coming into 2021 has served us well. You might recall that last year, once the pandemic hit, we decided to hold revenues flat for FY 2021. We knew that we had some increases related to real estate, but we knew that there was going to be some categories that were going to be impacted by the pandemic. So we went ahead and projected that other revenue categories were going to be down, and again, flat overall revenue. That's actually served us pretty well this year because it's allowed us to only make small adjustments to our revenues. We haven't had to take any drastic measures in order to balance the budget. And so we felt it was important to continue that conservative posture heading into 2022 as well. I do think that this budget builds upon the success that we've had in utilizing our federal stimulus funds. As we point out, particularly the just over $200 million that we received through the CARES Coronavirus Relief Fund. We did not assume any additional stimulus funds as part of this budget. Even if we had known about the American Rescue Plan when we released this budget in February, we still wouldn't have included those funds because they're one time. And certainly we're very careful about separating one-time dollars from our recurring budgetary numbers. So, you know, since this presentation was given on February 23rd, we have received additional information about what Fairfax County will receive through the American Rescue Plan. We're estimating that we'll receive just over $222 million. We're expecting about half of it to come hopefully within the next 4 to 6 weeks or so And then the other half would not come any earlier than a year from now. So we have a little bit of time before we would get the full funding. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about stimulus funding as the meeting goes on. I did want to note that the adjustments that we have outlined in this presentation are consistent with the priority areas as included in our draft countywide strategic plan. You may recall that we initially had released a draft plan last year. I'm ended up putting that on pause, but the updated plan was released concurrent with this budget, and we'll speak more about the strategic plan in just a second. So in the next slide, we have some highlights for the FY22 advertised budget. You'll see in that top line, this budget is balanced on $1.14 per $100 of assessed value. So we have assumed a 1 cent reduction in the real estate tax rate. Based on equalization, which is the value of your home last year versus this year without any type of renovations or adjustments, the average tax bill, even with the tax rate decrease, would still go up over $224. I will note that the board in their action on March 9th did vote to advertise the current tax rate of $1.15. That's just to provide the board some flexibility in terms of their deliberations on the 22 budget. And so at this point, because $1.15 has been advertised, the board cannot adopt a rate higher than $1.15, but they can always adopt a rate $1.15 or lower. This budget does include equal increases for both county and schools disbursements. We've been doing it this way now for a number of years. It is a small increase of just 0.55%. For the school side, that results in an increase in the school operating fund of just over $14 million. And you'll see that the school board request was over $104 million. So we have a pretty significant discrepancy between the school board request and what we've included. I would note that over $60 million of that school board request was related to a compensation adjustment of 3%. I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but right now, the state had approved, it's kind of complicated. The state has included matching funds for school compensation increases if you include compensation of adjustments of at least 2%. So the schools included a 3% adjustment, but when the state approves a pay increase for school employees, they generally only fund about 20% or less. So it results in about a $60 million hit to the county. And so as a result, the school board actually requested additional funds from the county in order to fund that pay adjustment. The advertised budget does not include any funding for employee pay increases on the county side. When we met with the board back in November on the 22 forecast, we had alluded to the fact that we didn't think that we were going to have the resources available for 22 for pay. And just for context, the county's full compensation plan is about $55 million. We have included a recommendation as part of this budget. This ties back to that conservative budgetary posture of a $20 million unappropriated reserve for economic recovery. One of the things that we did for the 2021 budget was set aside just under $10 million in a general fund pandemic reserve. And we've been able to use those funds for pandemic response efforts that weren't eligible for stimulus reimbursement. And so we've recommended this reserve. It's $20 million versus the 10 we included in 2021. It's unappropriated, which means the board has to take action before it's utilized. And we thought that it could be used for both economic recovery efforts for either the county or the school. So I would anticipate that the schools may have some recommendations and some requests for use of those funds if those do remain in reserve when the budget is adopted. We have been able to fund some modest investments in board priorities. We'll talk through those in later slides. You'll probably hear me say several times that some of the items that we have funded are tied to initiatives that were previously approved by the board. And I think that body-worn cameras is a good example that we have listed there. The board had approved the implementation of the full body-worn camera program back at carryover. And so we needed to put in baseline funds since those are recurring expenses. And so you'll hear me say that probably a few times throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. So really quickly, before we get into some of the budget specifics, we have a little more information on the countywide strategic plan that I had alluded to earlier. You know, we did put the initiative kind of on hold, on pause when the pandemic struck, but it doesn't mean that we weren't still working behind the scenes. And so we did utilize this time to make some updates to the plan based on the fact that this country has gone through pretty significant changes over the past year. not just related to the pandemic, but certainly the renewed emphasis on racial equity. So we've made, again, I would say there were contextual changes to the plan. We have not changed any of the fundamental components, including the 9 priority outcome areas. There is a survey available right now for folks to provide some input on the strategic plan, but we anticipate that we're going to have a fairly long community engagement period. We know right now that folks are focused on the pandemic and protecting themselves and keeping themselves and their families healthy. And so we've actually shifted the time frame of the adoption of the strategic plan. Initially, we had anticipated that it would be concurrent with adoption of the county's budget on May 4th. But now we've pushed it back, and we anticipate that the board would take action in early October. So hopefully that's just going to give us a little bit of additional time to be able to get community feedback on the plan before the board takes action. Next slide. So in this next slide, I just think that this is a pretty helpful graphic in terms of seeing how our annual revenue changes from year to year. This shows the annual change in our general fund revenue. The general fund is primarily the fund that we speak to as part of these presentations. And I would draw your attention to the blue bars. So you can see in fiscal year 2020 that our revenue grew about 2.4%. It was impacted at the end of the year by the pandemic, otherwise it would have been slightly higher. Then in 2021, you can see that negative 0.3%, because right now we're actually projecting that revenues in 2021 are going to be slightly down from actual revenues in fiscal year 2020. And I would note that, again, this presentation was as of February 23rd. We did provide our third quarter budget review update to the board last week. And we've updated our revenues again, slightly decreasing them. And so right now that 0.3% reduction is actually about 0.5%. So we're actually recommending taking revenues down a little bit more as part of our third quarter review. And then you can see in FY22, currently we're projecting that revenues will be up about 1.5%. You can see those orange bars. Those orange bars are really the real general fund revenue figures. But we wanted to delineate these because those orange bars include the impact of that one-time CARES funding, that stimulus funding that we had received in April of last year. And so because that's one-time funds, those aren't part of our normal general fund revenues. And so we wanted to make sure that we segregated that. Next slide, please. So this next slide provides a little bit more information about the real estate tax base. Real estate is almost 70% of our general fund revenue. So certainly as real estate goes, so do our general fund revenues. And I would draw your attention to the bottom right-hand corner for 2022. So you can see a little bit more of the detail regarding the changes in real estate. You can see overall equalization, including residential and commercial properties, is just over 2%. But then when you drill down, you can see that it really is two different tales in terms of the numbers. That for residential real estate, certainly it's been very strong. Interest rates are low. Folks are looking towards a future where maybe they're going to be teleworking more. Maybe they need more space. They can move a little bit further away from their businesses. And so you can see residential equalization was at 4.25%, so quite strong. On the commercial side, we were anticipating that there was going to be a negative impact related to the pandemic. And you can see that commercial properties are actually down over 4%. Then with that growth component of 0.86, you can see that total real estate growth as part of this budget is at 2.88%. Next slide, please. So I'll spend a little bit of time on this slide just because I think that it's a good summary of the numbers for the 22 budget. Starting at the top, the available revenue at the current real estate tax rate of $1.15, that generates about $69 million in additional revenue for the county. That's our net revenue increase at $1.15. With the county executive's recommendation to take the tax rate down by a penny, that takes about $27 million off the table. So with that and a small adjustment to transfers in, you can see the net available revenue is about $42.5 million. And again, that's for not only county requirements, but school requirements as well, given that a majority of the school's budget is funded through the county's transfer to the school operating fund. You can see that we've listed the disbursement adjustments by category. Most of those categories are related to the strategic plan, except for the first couple. You can see the first one is county compensation. Again, I noted that we have not included any pay adjustments as part of this budget for county employees. However, we do have some savings related to employee benefits. You might recall now for a number of years that we have been working to shift our employees away from our high cost copay plans to some of our lower cost co-insurance and consumer directed health plans. And so that's resulted in savings not only for the county in terms of the employer contribution, but also for employees as well for out of pocket costs. So it really has been a win-win. But again, that almost $2 million in savings is related to employee benefits. There's a small increase there for county debt service. That's tied to the bond sale that just took place in January, where we sold about $110 million worth of county bonds. For lifelong education and learning, very, very small decrease on the county side is just related to a per capita calculation for our contribution to Northern Virginia Community College. On the school side, that $13 million is two adjustments, the net of two adjustments. The first is that increase to the school operating fund, which I mentioned earlier, of just over $14 million. And then we actually had about $1 million savings related to school debt service. Both the county and schools have benefited over this past year related to refundings. We've been able to refund some of our debt at lower interest rates. And so we've been able to generate a savings there. So there's a slight savings for school debt service for 22. Safety and security, you can see that that's the largest category, largest investment as part of this budget. That's primarily related to new facilities, including the South County Police Station, where we've included the last tranche of uniform positions for that station, as well as the new Scotts Run Fire Station in Tysons. That's also where you'll see the baseline funding that I mentioned earlier for the Body Worn Camera program, as well as some additional investments in the Office of the Commonwealth's Attorney. There was a presentation a number of months ago to the Public Safety Committee meeting of the board discussing some of the workload issues related to the Office of the Commonwealth's Attorney, and so we've added some positions there. Health and Environment, that $9.12 million, is related in part to positions that were previously approved by the board at our quarterly reviews. And one of the examples that I'll speak to was 35 public health nurse positions that we had added for the health department to help augment our pandemic response. We've been able to use stimulus funds to fund those positions for 2021, but we've included baseline funding for those positions for FY 2022, because post-pandemic, those positions will shift to our school health program to help improve the ratio of students to nurses, again, in that school health program. And empowerment, forget about the environment part. That's the challenging part of this priority outcome areas. It's so big, it's health and environment. On the environmental side, we've also included some investments for environmental projects, as well as some baseline funding for two positions for the Office of Energy and Environmental Coordination that were previously approved at a quarterly review. And we've included the baseline funding for those positions as well. So we've been able to make some modest investments for our environmental program as well. In the area of empowerment and support for residents facing vulnerability, the primary adjustment here was also related to some positions that were previously approved at a quarterly review. These, however, were related to increased support in our coordinated services planning group. Certainly with the pandemic, we saw increased call volume to the county's 222 line, and our residents were seeing increased wait times when they called that line. So we've added some resources there in order to improve those wait times and help assist those residents more quickly. And we've included baseline funding for those positions as part of that category. In the area of effective and efficient government, we have a number of adjustments there. I'd like to note that for this category, really a lot of the adjustments here are kind of spread across the priority outcome areas. We've included some positions for collective bargaining. Now that collective bargaining is on the horizon for the county with the General Assembly's action last year, as well as some additional support for the Office of Elections and our Office of Capital Facilities to help support our capital program. For cultural and recreational opportunities, that adjustment is also related to new facilities primarily, including the new community center in Lee District, as well as the new Sully Community Center. You can see for housing and neighborhood livability, as well as economic opportunity, we have not been able to make sizable adjustments there, although we are adding some positions to assist with affordable housing efforts in the Department of Housing and Community Development, and some additional support in our Department of Economic Initiatives. However, I'd like to note that these are areas where I think that we've really been able to utilize stimulus funds. For housing and neighborhood livability specifically, we've set aside $28 million in our coronavirus relief funds for basic needs assistance, including rental assistance, The county's also been using funds that we received through the Emergency Rental Assistance Program for the federal government. And then in the area of economic opportunity, I think one of the most successful programs that the board stood up using stimulus funds was our RISE grant program, where one-time grants were provided to small businesses and nonprofits who were negatively impacted by the pandemic. In the area of mobility and transportation, you can see we have not included any adjustments. Typically, the adjustments that you would see here would be related to the county's contributions for Metro or Connector. We've been fortunate for 2021 that some stimulus funds flowed through WMATA and benefited both Connector and help us offset our operating subsidy requirement for Metro. And we anticipate there are going to be additional stimulus funds which will assist us with those budgets as well for 2022. If we need to make any adjustments there when the WMATA budget is finalized, we would do that at carryover for year end. We did have some agency reductions in savings. You can see almost $16 million. A good portion of that, just for transparency purposes, is simply the redirection of the almost $10 million in the general fund pandemic reserve. That was shifted. It was a disbursement. It was technically appropriated last year. So it shows as a reduction here, but it really goes to that $20 million in balance. But I would note that in that 15.91, there is just over $6 million in actual agency reductions. We worked with a number of our agencies to identify recurring savings through either position vacancies or operational efficiencies, program redesigns. And so we were able to take, again, almost over $6 million in reductions from our agencies, not intended to impact operations in any way, just a realization of recurring savings there. We'd have some savings for our reserves. I would note that we are fully funding our reserves as part of this budget. They are anticipated to be fully funded at the 10% of general fund disbursements target that we put into place back in 2016. And so you can see at the end of the day, our total uses total about $22.5 million. And so then that available balance of $20 million is again what we're recommending to be set aside in an economic recovery reserve. Next slide, please. So just kind of looking ahead, certainly for the 22 budget, we're going to continue to closely monitor our revenue categories. And if one of the categories that we're watching closely is BPOL. For example, the business, professional, and occupational license revenue. That's a tax category where it's based on gross receipts from last calendar year for 2020. It's not due until March 1st, the Department of Tax Administration. So tax admin right now is actually going through those receipts and trying to determine what our projection is for 2021. Certainly, if those revenues look better than what we had anticipated, and we did anticipate that revenue category was going to be down for the current fiscal year, we may come forward to the board as part of our add-on package that normally goes to the board right around the middle of April. But certainly, depending particularly on BPOL, it may be that we're coming to the board as part of our add-on package with additional revenue adjustments, either a positive direction or potentially in a negative direction, depending on where those BPOL receipts come in. Certainly, we're continuing to maximize stimulus resources as appropriate. I mentioned that we're expecting to get just over $111 million in that first tranche of funding from the American Rescue Plan. We're actively awaiting a specific guidance from the U.S. Department of Treasury in terms of the allowable expenses. We have some broad categories that were outlined in the bill, but we learned our lesson from the Coronavirus Relief Fund that we really do have to wait for some of that specific guidance to come out from Treasury before we make any decisions there. Certainly, even if the economy improves for 2023, it'll be a challenging budget year because I think there's a lot of pent-up demand. Certainly, employee compensation, I think, will be at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and it may be impacted by collective bargaining as well. As again, that's something that the county is getting ready to embark upon. And certainly there were a lot of areas where we weren't able to make any sizable investments as part of this budget in terms of additional resources for affordable housing or school readiness. So I know that those will be discussed for FY 2023 as well. And then our hope is that the board will take action on the strategic plan again later this fall, and that'll help inform some of the decisions for the FY 2023 budget as well. On the next slide, we have a little bit of information that speaks to what Supervisor Alcorn was mentioning earlier about how to get involved. There are lots of ways, either by phone or sending in written testimony or video testimony. And so we've just included the website there where you can go and fill out the speakers form to sign up to speak at one of the public hearings. And then the important budget dates are listed on the next slide, including those budget hearing dates that Supervisor Alcorn mentioned earlier, beginning April 13th through the 15th. The board marks up the budget on April 27th. For all intents and purposes, that's when most of the budgetary decisions are made, on April 27th. And then once the board marks up the budget, staff goes back and prepares the appropriation resolutions that the board then adopts on May 4th. And so that's the official adoption of the budget on May 4th. So some of those are some of the important dates coming up in terms of the budget development. I know I went through a lot of that information quickly, and so I'm certainly happy to entertain any questions as this meeting goes on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. Appreciate that very thorough presentation. We will open it up to questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Lisa in just a minute. Before, and mainly tonight, I want to hear from you all that have taken the time to participate in this town hall. But before we do that, I just want to flag a few highlights and some things that are being discussed by me and some of my colleagues. First of all, I want to emphasize one of the things that Christina mentioned was that the tax rate was advertised at no more than $1.15 per $100 of assessed value. That's the real estate tax. So that was a very important decision, because it does mean that the real estate tax rate will not for next year be able to be any higher than it is this year. I was actually, I think I was the only person on the board to actually note that I would have liked to have seen the real estate tax rate be at least advertised higher. And the reason for that is we're now being proposed, at least, to have the second year of employee pay being frozen across Fairfax County employees, as well as all school employees, teachers, and staff. So that's a lot, and that is something that advertised in the budget at the current rate of $1.15 makes it very difficult to do very much about, although we'll be certainly looking at additional information that we get during the coming weeks. The second thing that $1.15 makes very difficult to do is do anything more on the county level, at least, for affordable housing. And as some of the folks listening here know, that's one of the things I ran for office on, was to do more at the county level for affordable housing. As Christina mentioned, though, we do have some opportunity using federal stimulus funds, which were enacted recently, that we should have some additional opportunities at the local level to use those in pursuit of more and/or retaining affordable housing. I would just also, for one area that may be confusing to some of you longtime budget watchers, the county executive's proposed budget did reduce the tax rate to $1.14. It's very unusual. I've been watching this a long time. I think it's maybe happened before, but I don't remember when it was. So I think that maybe made him a little bit more popular with some taxpayers, probably a little less popular with some county employees and maybe school employees. But that is a proposed budget. And ultimately, the Board of Supervisors is now responsible for reviewing that. The Board of Supervisors, we did tie our hands by saying that we can't go more than $1.15 on the real estate tax rate. But other than that, basically, it is now up to the Board of Supervisors to make the call. And I'll just note one other thing that I've been talking about, and Christina mentioned this as well. One of the charts showed that the changes in assessments, residential versus non-residential, in this year. And residential was up a little over 4%. Non-residential is down by 4%. And it's actually even more painful than that. If you look at the distribution of where residential assessments have increased, they've increased more on the lower value homes. So in effect, homes that are more affordable became more expensive this past year or this year compared to homes that are already more expensive. So in effect, and I understand, the reason for my colleagues really not wanting to even entertain the possibility of a higher tax rate. The concern was that we raised taxes and basically will just hit people that have more modest homes even harder than they would be under just the fluctuation that we've seen in the change of assessments where residential is going up and non-residential is going down. So that's a tough situation that we're dealing with. And the last thing that I'll note, and this is something that I've talked about some, I'm going to be talking, I think, a lot more about over the coming year or two. I think this divergence of residential assessments and non-residential, it's certainly one result of the pandemic, but I'm afraid it's more than that. It's, I think, showing some of the changes in the underlying economy that we're going to be very challenged with over the coming years. As those of us that work in office buildings begin to go back to work, it's not at all clear, and the data that I'm seeing show that many of our working habits, at least in professional offices, may be quite different in the coming years. We don't know yet. But if, say, we go to a system where even if it's just many, even if it's not all, even if it's just many office employees have more flex time, where they're in the office only 2 or 3 days a week, the impact on our office market could be substantial. And I think, as most of us know, over the past decades, we've really been able to afford our excellent school system, our excellent level of services, in large part based on the real estate taxes coming in from shopping centers and office parks. And those are not two areas of the economy that exactly are growing right now. So, so you're going to hear me talking more and more about the need for tax reform. And that's not something we can do on the local level. We achieved some more flexibility in the past 15 months from the General Assembly on that. But to really have tax reform where we remove the tremendous over-reliance that we have on the real estate tax, in particular the residential real estate tax, is going to require us to get new authority from Richmond. So anyway, you'll hear me talking more about that. You may tell me I'm crazy. That's fine. Feel free to do so. But at this point, it's your turn to tell us what you think and also ask questions. So Lisa, I don't know if you've been watching questions coming in the chat or anybody with their hand up, but I'll turn it over to you and be happy to, with Christina, field any questions.
Okay. Hi, everybody. All right. We have Supervisor Alcorn. We have Jerry, then Eric, then Lori. Paul has a question in chat, and then we're going to Gary. So we'll start off. I'm going to unmute Jerry right now. Jerry, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes. Hi,
so.
Jerry.
Hi, thanks so much. And Supervisor Alcorn, I really appreciated your frank conversation about the affordability of housing. I mean, quite frankly, free market capitalism as measured by affordable housing production from for-profit developers since 2000 has not and likely will not in the future deliver the affordable homes that we desperately need in Fairfax County. Leverage federal, state, and local governmental intervention is the primary pathway to build a more sustainable shelter future. When the county established a new penny fund for affordable homes in 2006, our laudatory goal did not actually match our actual needs. And the unmet housing needs accumulate over time, do not magically disappear when elected leaders and housing developers ignore the readily under difficult, ignore reality under difficult fiscal constraints. So the one penny fund fell in half by 2010. It's never been reinstalled, leaving a local legacy of 5.5 pennies worth of debt towards affordability of homes. And when you were elected in 2019 with additional new energized board members, we all advocated for the full penny addition to the half penny. However, COVID forced retreat during 2020 and adding an additional penny legacy deficit. So shockingly, our recent evidence showed that poorly sheltered Black, Indigenous, people of color neighbors suffered deadly consequences attributable in part to their poor shelter situations. The board received a presentation on this by the Department of Health. So I would urge you to work your darndest and would be willing to help in whatever way I could to invest fully towards the full reinvestment in affordable housing. There's funding in the American Rescue Plan Act under the Relief for Homelessness that would allow counties and localities to purchase failed hotels, which could be easily readapted for affordable home usage. Fairfax should be at the forefront of this challenge. And, Joe and Christina have said we've got 4 pennies worth of additional federal relief coming from the American Rescue Act. Boy, let's put 1.5 pennies this year and 1.5 pennies next year with another $111 million and really step up to the plate on your laudatory promise from your election in 19. I hope I can help you, and I really look forward to what the board could do with the unanticipated. There was zero accountancy by Brian Hill in proposing a budget for this year that anticipated the new revenues from the American Rescue Plan Act. And we've got to be aggressive in making sure they build us back better with affordable housing leading the way. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jerry, very much. And Jerry, I would remind you that when I ran in my campaign, I know it not only said I would support 1 penny additionally to make it 1.5 pennies, but actually to make it 2 cents. So I remember that, and I haven't forgotten. And I know, even with the pandemic, I haven't forgotten that. But to do that, I got to get 6 votes, or we have to get 6 votes. I'll put it that way.
Yes.
And Jerry, you brought up something else that's really, I think, important, and it's been the really interesting variable in this whole budget season, and that is the federal money that's coming in. I actually raised a number of questions right before we voted to limit the tax rate to $1.15. Basically, I guess the question is it possible to use some of those funds as stimulus funds to provide relief to homeowners and renters? In other words, the same people that would be bearing the taxes that we're talking about here in terms of the real estate tax. There was some language in the bill that restricted the ability for states and localities to use those federal stimulus funding to cut taxes. However, since then, just last week, Treasury Secretary Yellen did clarify that, and at least the way I read it, and I talked to Christina or the county attorney about this, so I may have this wrong, but I believe there is some additional flexibility there for us to use the funds in a number of different ways, at least consistent with how we do things, how Fairfax County's tax structure is set up. Unfortunately, we didn't have that information. I wasn't able to use that information with my colleagues to get a higher tax rate advertised where we could use some of these federal stimulus funds in a creative way. And unfortunately, the timing just didn't work out. But, you know, based on what we have right now, Jerry, I totally agree. I'm very hopeful that we're going to be able to put some of these federal funds to good use and put them in a way that, you know, we have a severe shortage of permanent supportive housing in Fairfax County. And perhaps, just perhaps, one or two of these hotel properties that are basically under severe stress right now, or even out of business in some cases, could be hopefully useful in that regard. So, Jerry, thank you for articulating that and for your advocacy. And yeah, just thanks. Okay,
Okay.
Lisa, should we go to the next?
Yes, we have Eric now. I'm going to unmute Eric. Go ahead.
Welcome,
Thanks.
Eric.
Hi, Eric Goplerud, Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. I want to just support what Jerry was just saying about the importance of affordable housing as a key issue in this county, an issue about equity, about fairness, and strongly support the increase, if at all possible, of 1 penny or 1.5 penny on the tax rate. One of the issues, as you know, that we've been very concerned about is energy poverty, which also strikes the same people who are low income, affordable housing, and who are paying a high proportion of their rent or a high proportion of their income to pay for utility bills. One of the things we very much hope is that the county will aggressively go after the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative funds to upgrade the energy efficiency of low-cost housing. So very much want to support what Jerry was saying. It's an issue, it's an environmental issue, it's an equity issue, it's a fairness issue. The other part is that the county is in the midst of the Comprehensive Energy and Climate Action Plan, which will come before the Environmental Committee, or at least scheduled to come before the Environmental Committee in July, and before the full board in, I think, the September meeting. There are some increases in the budget for 2022, but there are no reserves for what are you going to do when the CCAP plan comes in. You know, it's if what we're doing is just incrementally waiting until 2023, 2024, waiting for, I don't know, Godot. At some point, don't we need to be putting in some reserves or flexibilities so that when the plan comes in, or in a year from now, when the resiliency plan comes in, that we have built in that we're really going to take this seriously, that we are in a climate crisis. So thank you, Walter. I very much appreciate your advocacy on both of these issues, and would, not that I think you're going to solve this, but it's important that you know that this is really a concern, that CCAP seems to be out of phase, and we need to be planning in 2022 that we're going to do something about it.
Eric, thank you very much. And I really appreciate you putting this into the budget context. I would encourage you to share those thoughts with the full board through the public hearing process, and obviously, you know, with your colleagues that you're working with in other supervisor districts as well. Thank you, Eric. Lisa, who's next?
Next we have Lori. Lori, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You can go ahead.
Hi there.
Hello, Lori.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. So my question is more so, what is the timeline that the county sees in including raises for its employees in the future? I'm a county employee. I understand that COVID wreaked havoc on our budget last year. But I find it incredibly disappointing that as one of the wealthiest counties in this region, our neighboring jurisdictions are able to move forward with employee raises. Prince William, Loudoun, Alex City, Stafford County, Spotsylvania County, Falls Church City. And we are not. We're failing our employees who can't afford to be residents. Obviously with this tax hike or, dropping down the tax, it's still a tax on our properties, where we're giving more to the county and we're not getting anything in return. Talking about the benefits, I've been on the HSA plan since I started, so I definitely haven't seen anything back this year. I work way harder at home as a teleworker now than not that I didn't work hard before, but I work longer hours and I do more work because I'm home and it's easier to access and walk away than it was before. And advocating for a pay within grade raise has been shut down. So I guess my question is, where is the county gonna see a timeline for this? We actually just sold our townhouse in the county because we can't afford to buy another property in the county, and the townhouse is something that we outgrew. So we've moved out of Fairfax County in order to have more affordable living. So it's just really disappointing to see that the county doesn't want to retain us because they don't want to pay us.
Lori, thank you very much for your comment, and I hear you, and I agree. I'm very concerned about the implications of a second full year of pay freeze, but without shirking the Board of Supervisors' responsibility, let me ask Christina, what is the thinking in the long term? In terms of how are we going to catch back up? What's the thinking along those lines?
Well, a couple of things. One, we have included in our third quarter review, again, that just went to the board last week, we've left a balance for the board to consider a one-time bonus for employees, which I know is not the same as money in your baseline that counts towards retirement. But we did make a concerted effort to put forth some agency reductions, try to take advantage of the one-time savings in our agencies, and again, put money on the table, which would cover a bonus for merit employees of about $1,000 and $500 for non-merits. Again, the board will take action on third quarter on April 27th. I anticipate that we'll have a discussion on this at our budget committee meeting on April the 6th. So we are trying to find some ways of trying to reward our employees, given the fact that we know that we don't have compensation included in the baseline for 22. We do, on an annual basis, perform benchmark reviews of our job classes, and we will do this fall as well. So certainly, I understand that a number of jurisdictions around us are planning to do compensation increases, and it's disheartening, particularly. But if you delve down into those jurisdictions, the revenue situation is just so much different. Loudoun has earned almost $200 million just in additional revenues for personal property alone on data centers. Residential real estate is gone up more in Loudoun and Prince William, for example, just two of the jurisdictions. So we understand that other jurisdictions are in a much different position than we are in terms of their ability to do pay increases. So when we do our benchmark studies in the fall, that will be taken into consideration in the numbers. We look at benchmark classes not only for our uniformed job classes, but for our non-uniformed as well. We have a number of benchmark job classes that we look out to the market and see where we are in comparison. So I would anticipate that if other jurisdictions are going to implement the increases that they're proposing, we're going to see some of our job classes fall out of market. And as a result, we will likely be making recommendations for a number of our job classes to be increased in FY 2023. So we do that annual market review. We did it these past 2 years, but we have not implemented any of those adjustments, again, because we weren't doing compensation, so we didn't. But I anticipate that 2023 is going to be different, and we might have to do a little bit of catching up if the jurisdictions do move forward with some pretty sizable pay increases in some of those jurisdictions, for sure.
Thank you, Christina, and Lori. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Lisa, who do we have next?
Next, we have a question on the chat. Just a moment. It is from Paul, and it says, did the board essentially leave Federal Recovery Act money on the table by funding 0.55% increase in the schools instead of the required 2%?
I'm not sure I understand the required 2%. I can talk to the other. Christina, do you know the reference there?
I think so. I think part of the issue is just a matter of timing, and I don't think that I explained this well when I went through the presentation. But when the school board put together their request for the school operating transfer, the state budget was still being developed, and so as a result, the school board put in a request of a 3% pay increase for school employees. Ultimately, where the state budget stands right now is that the state will provide a match for anything of at least 2%. For the county, with a 2% pay increase for schools employees, the state provides about $9 million towards the total cost of $49 million. So the county would still have to come up with over $40 million in order to provide that 2% increase for school employees. And that's not even considering any adjustment for county employees. So a couple of things related to the question. One, the board hasn't taken any action on the proposed budget. The board won't take any action until the April and May timeframe. And so certainly there could be adjustments, but that 0.55 increase that we've included in the advertised budget is just the overall increase to the school operating fund. It's not necessarily tied to compensation adjustments in any way.
Yeah, and I would just note one other thing, and this is, I don't think it's a sleight of hand, but it's where maybe my view, I was looking at things a little differently than my colleagues. I do agree that the stimulus funds should not be used for recurring expenses. I don't think that would be financially responsible to do that. So I would not want to see a situation where we took those one-time funds and say put it into the base of our salary schedule and on county and or schools. That being said, and again, some of this may have been timing, and I am disappointed in this that we were not able to find a more creative use, and perhaps we still can to a limited extent. In a creative use of those federal stimulus funds in order to both help our county and school employees and provide some relief to residential homeowners and renters perhaps too. So anyway, I think there's still a lot of work to be done. As Christina said, the budget's not adopted, but we definitely tied our hands a little bit behind, at least one hand behind our back. With the tax rate at $1.15, and I'll just say too, this is not a fun budget year, but I do worry even more about next year, and so we'll just have to see how the economy goes this year, how the stimulus funds, how successful they are, but I worry about our reliance on the real estate tax, particularly as it relates to our historic reliance on non-residential, which has been fantastic for those of us that own homes and want good services. But it's cloudy, I would say, the outlook for that part of the economy, for at least the next couple of years. Lisa, who else do we have?
Okay, we have Gary Malton is up, and Gary should be unmuted now.
Hello, Gary.
Hi, Supervisor Alcorn. Thank you for doing this. First, I just want to thank Christina for the fabulous job she's done and her staff have done for the last year now on producing excellent budgets for coping with the environment we're in. It has to be tremendously difficult, and just a lot of thanks to the county staff that does that. In talking about that, the difficulties, Christina, the estimations you're making have to be a lot more difficult in terms of putting them in a budget like this and being really confident about them. Can you talk a little bit about any concerns that you have, or how you've done some of those, given the trends that you would have relied on that are now, as Supervisor Alcorn says, pretty cloudy? That's one question. Second, I can't find in the budget, maybe it's just me, where you have contract kind of things, where the county lets contracts for support services or other areas. It's probably in the budget somewhere, but I just can't find it. So there's a question on that. And then third, process itself. As Supervisor Alcorn knows, I'm on a tax board, and that didn't meet in time to give opinions to, the county staff or the supervisors on the tax rates in various districts. So getting that lined up, and then some things in here, I just wonder, like collective bargaining, is that already assumed to be approved by the board? Or is that in here in advance without approval of the board? So there's a process question. Part of that's for you, Christina, but also maybe for Supervisor Alcorn, on how we handle those kind of things. Like collective bargaining talks about, increases in the future and 6 employees, which was kind of baffling to me, but talk about estimation, things in the budget, and then the process itself, if you could, please.
Sure. So for the first question, the forecasting, I think that we're really lucky that we have a really strong revenue team, or revenue coordinator that's been with our department now for a number of years, and they do a really fantastic job working with our agencies, and especially the Department of Tax Administration. We have monthly revenue meetings. We're really well versed. Anytime we get additional information from Department of Tax Administration, they share that information with us, and we're able to incorporate that in our projections. I think, again, going back to 2021, most years we lament our reliance upon the real estate tax, right? Certainly the burden is on residential homeowners, as Supervisor Alcorn said, but the fact that real estate is 70% of our revenue these past couple of years has actually been somewhat helpful to us, because certainly in jurisdictions that are more tourism focused, where they're more reliant upon transient occupancy or sales tax, they're in a much different financial position than we are. And so I think that we were really fortunate in 2021, especially, that we were able to say, yes, we know we're going to have increases in real estate. So we're going to assume that sales tax is going to go down. We're going to assume that transient occupancy is going to go down. We're going to assume that BPOL is going to go down. And so we've been able, I think that we were really hopeful that we were being too pessimistic in terms of what the revenues were going to be for this year, in terms of how the pandemic was going to impact our revenues. But so far, again, we haven't had to make significant adjustments to those projections. And so again, I count ourselves really fortunate, where we have had to make some adjustments for both third quarter and at mid-year, were primarily for our SAC program, school-age childcare. A year ago, we did not even anticipate that SAC wasn't going to look like SAC in April of 2021. And so that's an area where normally we generate $40+ million over the course of the fiscal year in terms of fees. And we're looking at maybe generating about $3 million for 2021. So that's actually one of those categories that we didn't do a great job in projecting, because we just didn't anticipate that that was going to be the kind of impact that we saw in that program. But again, I think that we're really fortunate with the team that we have in place. I don't think that you missed anything for contract cost in the budget. Those would be embedded in operating expenses in each of our agencies. And again, our budget, we tend to focus on incremental changes from year to year. Many years we actually put in adjustments for contracts, primarily those that are personnel driven. However, we have not put in those adjustments for fiscal year 2022. So, if there is any specific information that you're interested in, certainly you can reach out to me. I can try to pull that information, but I don't think necessarily that you missed anything in our budget documents. I know that there are many, many pages, but I don't think that you missed anything there. And I'll speak a little bit to the collective bargaining piece. I certainly, if the board decided that they didn't want to go down the route of approving an ordinance for collective bargaining,
we would pull back on those positions. I think the positions that we included in the 22 budget is we just wanted to make sure that when the board took action, that we were able to actually start putting some positions in place in the county attorney's office and Department of Human Resources and able to begin that work. And certainly it may be that we end up having to add additional resources if we do end up adopting an ordinance for collective bargaining as well. So that was really just to provide us some flexibility to be able to react to the board and what I know is going to be a pretty significant decision that's made by the board in the upcoming months.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. And I'll jump in also on the collective bargaining thing. There is a study group that has Chairman McKay and Supervisor Walkinshaw are working on that, also talking with folks, I believe, on the school side and looking at a possible plan for how collective bargaining might be structured in Fairfax County. I believe Virginia was one of only 5 states in the country that did not have any collective bargaining, where it was disallowed. That's changed, and now localities, counties, and cities anyway, are able to institute collective bargaining systems. And actually, that's something I support. I think it makes sense, and I'm not sure the county executive's budget would have shown a second year of pay freezes if we had collective bargaining already in place. But it is all in the details and how it's structured, because there are a wide variety of ways that collective bargaining can be done, and that's something Chairman McKay and Supervisor Walkinshaw are working on. But that's coming.
Am I still up
Yes.
to talk? Okay. It was really, more about process here. And, when does that show up in the budget? And as you know, back on the tax boards, those weren't meeting in time to put their 2 cents in on the budget. So the question was about like 6.5 years of collective bargaining, but it was really more about the process for Christina and you about when those things do appear in the budget itself.
Got it. Christina, can you answer that?
I wasn't sure in terms of the tax rates in the various districts, if there was one that you were speaking of in particular.
Well, I think it's more than just the one, the Reston Transportation Service District. That tax rate has an advisory board, as do others. And the boards apparently are not meeting in time to put their 2 cents in on, 2 cents in on what the tax rate should be. They're meeting after it's, or right up to the Board of Supervisors, and before you can give, your opinion and budget, and before the supervisor, or they're meeting essentially at the same time or after the Board of Supervisors have a chance to weigh in on the tax rate.
Gary, thank you for
service district.
Gary, thank you so much for reminding me of that. Yeah, Christina, you and I have not talked about this, but with the Reston Transportation Service District Advisory Board, there was a very good point, and Gary, you raised it. It was an excellent one at the recent meeting of that advisory board. Basically, they didn't meet to look at their needs for the coming year until after we'd already adopted a cap on their tax rate. So, so the suggestion was made, perhaps it would make sense to move their meeting up a month or two so that they, if, and I don't anticipate this, but if at some point they might need to recommend an increase in the service district rate, that they would at least be able to get it in before it was a done deal. And Tom Bashadny was on that call, and he agreed that's probably a process improvement going forward. So thank you, Gary.
Yeah, I think it may apply to more than Reston, and it's just the process of how these things end up in the budget. Sometimes they look like they've got there before the Board of Supervisors has had a chance to kind of weigh in. So that was the reason for it. But again, Christina and her staff have done a phenomenal job the last year plus. So thank her for outstanding performance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. Lisa, who do we have next?
Next we have Paul Barry, and I'm unmuting Paul. Go ahead, Paul.
Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Supervisor. I really appreciate the thoroughness of the presentation. I want to echo the last speaker. Christina, thank you for all the details. It's been terrific. Supervisor, I just, you know that I live in Reston, so I have skin in the game here when we're talking about tax policy, but I also have the privilege of serving as a policy advisor to Governor Northam. And I think connecting exactly what you said, the discussions that, that I'm mainly focused on in Richmond, certainly, and what you want to accomplish. We live in a Dillon rule state, to my great lament, and I think that home rule would accomplish a lot of things. But absent that, could you give some detail about what you'd like to accomplish and what policy solutions should we be churning up downstate so that Reston and Hunter Mill can profit?
Yeah, Paul, thank you. Thank you for asking. And this was not rehearsed or scheduled or anything, but thank you for asking, Paul. Honestly, I think we need to start having a discussion about a local income tax. I think what we need is tax reform on a revenue neutral basis, where we need to basically have the authority to drop the real estate tax and institute maybe a 1% local income tax, and hopefully a progressive local income tax, so that we can, one, diversify our local tax base. Two, we can actually set it up so that as our local economy grows, we actually, as a local government, are able to receive revenue from that growth in the economy. And three, we can actually start to really relieve the burden on the residential real estate homeowner. So maybe only in Hunter Mill can we have this discussion, but I think it's a discussion we need to have, Paul. And I would encourage, again, on a revenue neutral basis, not as a new tax and leave real estate the way it is. But I'm becoming more and more convinced that we're going to see a longer term trajectory of economic changes that we basically need to make sure that the economic activity in the county is capturable in our tax structure.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. Who else do we have?
Our next question is on the chat from Jennifer. The question is, are we anticipating guidance from the American Rescue Plan prior to the markup period or passage of the budget? If so, could that free up room in the budget for other initiatives before passage?
Christina, what is our understanding of that?
I mean, I've got my expectations pretty low in terms of when we'll receive the guidance. I know it took some time for the Coronavirus Relief Fund. My first priority is hoping that we get some information regarding our certification to receive our first tranche of funds. We actually haven't received any communication from the feds yet in terms of, normally the county executive has to certify that we'll use the funds in an appropriate manner before they will release them to us. I'm hopeful that we will get that before the board acts on third quarter on April the 27th. If so, the board can actually take action at that point to appropriate those funds. We'll actually be able to use them before fiscal year end. If not, we're going to have to go through a process with a public hearing and board action to get those funds appropriated for the county to actually spend. So I'm hopeful that by April 27th, we actually get the certification for those funds. I have not been given any indication of the timing of the guidance itself. I know that Government Finance Officers Association, NACO, they have given guidance to the Treasury of when you release the guidance and FAQs, try to be as comprehensive as you can the first time. One of the challenges that we had with the guidance for the Coronavirus Relief Fund is they released some guidance and FAQs, and then a couple months later they released more, and they released more. So we're hopeful that it's a little bit more thorough when they do release it initially, but they haven't given us any indication of when that's going to be. I don't think that it's going to impact the 22 budget though, again, because those are one-time funds. And so I think that the way we're going to utilize those stimulus funds are different than
what you see in the 22 advertised budget. So I don't necessarily, they're related, but I don't necessarily think that they're linked in terms of the timing, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Christina, and I have no idea. So thank you for thank you for providing what you know and your insights. Okay,
Our
Lisa, who do we
next,
have next?
our next question is, our person is Ann Wood. Ann, you are unmuted, so go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. When I can unmute, I definitely can tell you I can hear you.
Okay. And first, I want to say I very much appreciate what all of you are doing to try to balance all these competing claims at this tough time. I want to just speak briefly to the lower end of affordable housing. When I saw that penny had been cut from the tax rate, I really thought, oh, darn, that could have been used for so many things that we need. I will pay that real estate tax, and I am luckily able to do it. My home is what you described, Supervisor Alcorn. It's a small townhouse in South Reston that, again, has gone up in assessment. It's growing in value every year. These homes in recent years have become starter homes for families. They have usually 2 wage earners, and the babies, you know, frequently I go out and there's a new baby in the neighborhood. Those are the people that are buying these houses. And if they can afford these houses, then they are building, because of the increase in value, a payment for a bigger house down the road. But because of these increases, they are becoming increasingly out of reach to many people. What we really, really need is below all this. And I worry greatly about the evictions that are going to come someday. We've suspended that, but it's going to be a big mess down the road. So I would like to just encourage whatever attention you can give to the very lowest starter levels of housing, including housing for the people who lose their housing due to misfortune. The people who are evicted, where are we going to put them? Let's anticipate that that is going to be part of the consequence down the road of this pandemic. And I liked very much what my friend Jerry had to say about thinking about that now and seeing if there aren't ways to use some of this federal money to prepare for that in a way that would meet an emergency and also be something that we need periodically down the road. I've sat down with these homeless people. They've come to my church, and some of them are one step out of housing, some of them more severe, but that's what I just don't see available. Thank you for listening.
And thank you so much for your comment, and frankly for framing the issue in very human terms. I think that certainly helps me, and really relates the real issue that so many people, so many families are facing right now. So yeah, frankly, I'm open to ideas on how to how to move this forward. You know, I don't know, whatever might work. But I would again encourage you as well to put your 2 cents in at the budget hearings for the full board, as well as, you know, anything that you might put in writing. You spoke to it extremely well, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Jean. Jean, you should be unmuted right now.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm presuming you can hear me, and
Yes, hi, Jean.
hi. I want to just really thank you, Walter. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Lisa, for doing this budget planning meeting or budget community meeting, and to do it for Hunter Mill, because I guess for me it feels a little less daunting to ask a question when there's less people. I'm a member of the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, met with you, Walter, and also Return Peace Corps volunteers in Northern Virginia. And what I really want to ask about is the climate adaptation and resilience planning. So we were really happy to see that, two new positions for the Office of Energy and Environment, and I guess $1 million put forth for the planning phase of the CARP, the Community Adaptation and Resilience Plan. And very happy to see that we had a conversation with Mr. Cambise, with other, we had representatives from FACTS, we had a representative from 350.org, representative from Sierra Club, and a representative from the NAACP. And it was a very good discussion with Cambise and the two new people he hired to work on CARP. And very inspired to see that they hired Inspire Green to be one of their contractors. And Inspire looks like they work in like community-driven planning for climate resilience, which is kind of the heart of what we've been discussing. Is the most vulnerable population within Fairfax County are the ones that are going to be, if we have which we will have, I'm sure, different, hazardous events, whether it's floods or heat islands or windstorms that are going to affect. And the ones that are at the most vulnerable populations are the ones that are either renters or low income, and they have, they're the ones that will be maybe impacted the most, but also have the most difficult to recover from. I've got homeowners insurance, I've got savings, I can recover, but most vulnerable. So Inspire Green, it sounded really good to have them on board to do more community-driven planning. So the one question we had, or we proposed to Cambise is, it's great to have this planning for the year, and the plan is supposed to be completed in, I think, spring of 2022. But where are the funds to actually do some of this infrastructure planning, whatever comes out of the plan that needs to be done, whether it's, better flood infrastructure, whether it's better drainage, whether it's planting trees, reduce the heat islands, whatever the needs are that come out of the plan. And so Cambise said that, they don't have anybody on their staff right in the OAC to, go out and look for grants. And right now, the Biden administration has a lot of grants that can go out to communities. And then there's the Reggie grant. And so that's the biggest concern. We don't want to just do see the Fairfax County do a plan. There needs to be a way to get additional funds to do what needs to be done to build better resilience. And not only it's for the vulnerable populations in the county, but we have to look at if a whole business district gets flooded out, the tax base of that business district is not going to come back to the county for a while until it's rebuilt. There's items like that, and so that affects. So that's I guess my ask here is, how can work towards getting additional funding in 2022, 2023 to do what, after putting $1 million into the plan. So thank you for listening.
Jean, thank you very much. And Christina, I wondered if you might address some of the, basically what we've done recently in terms of Camby's office and some of the things, I guess one of the things that caught my attention particular there is our ability to go after grants on climate in particular.
Mhm.
Yeah, I made a note of that because certainly we have been adding staff in the Office of Energy and Environmental Coordination. So certainly that's a conversation that we can have with Camby's, because I agree, if we can tap into federal funds to help offset some of these costs, then that's ideal.
Mhm.
I would note that, just in terms of the budget planning, certainly we have the advertised budget that we spend a lot of time on talking with the community. But the past number of years, we've been putting quite a bit of funding in for environmental and energy initiatives as part of our quarterly reviews,
Mhm.
particularly carryover. So, in terms of not setting aside a reserve for either CCAP or the adaptation plan, it's one of those areas where certainly, budgeting is an iterative process. And so I would anticipate that once some of the recommendations come out, we start with putting in some one-time funds available at our quarterly reviews, particularly carryover, because that's when we have some of the funds that have fallen out from the previous year. And so we're able to take advantage of that. And then we look to seeing how we can build funding in the baseline in future years. This year, for example, we had some reductions that we were able to take in some of our capital project areas. And so we redirected those to the environmental projects. And so now we have about $1.3 million in our base for environmental projects. And so certainly I know that we don't go as fast as some folks would like us to, but I do think that we make a pretty concerted effort to try to piece together funding as we can, again, with the ultimate goal of building it in the baseline over time. But sometimes it has to be using one-time money in our quarterly reviews.
Mhm. Okay. So
Go ahead, Gene.
I was just going to say, we will be continuing to suggest to Camby's office about different funding opportunities, because one of our representatives to the CARP, or our representative from FACTS to the CARP works with smart cities. So he's very tied into funding. So we hope that, feeding that information to Camby's office allows Camby's maybe to tap into what other parts of the county that can go out and write those grants. So,
Gene, thank you very much. And I'd like to follow up on this as well. And Paul from my office, make a note of that. That might be something we would want to ask about as well. So thank you very much, Gene.
okay, you're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Lisa, who do we have next?
Next, we have Lynn Brown. Lynn, I'm unmuting you. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, Lynn.
Hi, how are you doing? Very good of you to do this.
Great, thank you.
And I'm going to take you up on your interest in alternative taxation mechanisms, because I think that, everything I'm seeing, I'm an economist, so everything I'm seeing is saying the world of work will look very, very different going forward. And in actual fact, now it's more the companies who are persuading their staff to work from home than the opposite way around, because it saves them a lot of money. But the reality is, it doesn't save the worker. I mean, I think many workers from home now are realizing their day is very elastic. They work longer hours and all the costs are transferred to them. And if you're not a self-employed person working from a home office, you have no tax deductions in respect of that. So I think it's transferring everything to the worker. So I would like to propose something which is happening in Europe, where they started much earlier than we did, and that's a digital services tax. So several years ago, Europe recognized that their cities were being killed by the likes of Amazon. And in fact, a couple of years back in the UK, Amazon's tax bill was 2% of its revenue, whereas a bricks and mortar store, a leading bricks and mortar retailer in the UK with an online presence too, paid more in tax on 50% of Amazon's revenue. The following year, Amazon's total tax bill increased 3%, their revenue went up 35%. And in case we think, oh, well, this is Europe and we were too stupid to recognize what was going on and get the tax appropriately, in the USA, Amazon paid no federal tax in 2017 or 18. And in 2019, because it's beginning to be embarrassed, it paid 1.2%. The average American that year paid 14%. So that, to me, it's not that we want to tax business and stop innovation, but there has to be a fairer distribution. Amazon will be doing the same here as it's doing in the UK, which is destroying a lots of bricks and mortar stores anyway, which with the COVID pandemic has driven that even more quickly. So yes, the real estate revenue from businesses is going to plummet and it's not going to come back. And I think that the Amazons of the world, I mean, I could have quoted Google as well, but the Amazons of the world need to step up. And I think that, I heard Paul earlier, I think that's particularly relevant for Virginia, given I know we gave lots of incentives to get them into Northern Virginia. But it's one thing to give them incentives to invest. It's another thing then to give them a pass on their tax bills. So I would suggest we need to look more at where we get our revenues from rather than keep transferring it, albeit tax neutral, to the citizen.
And thank you very much. I think your comment really underscores the need for our tax structure to keep up with our economy. And I'm not sure, well, I mean, let's face it. I mean, in Virginia, local government's financed by real estate taxes goes back to the House of Burgesses. You know, this is literally centuries of tradition. And I'm not saying, you know, that it should all be thrown out, but certainly making sure that our tax structure evolves as our economy evolves, and frankly, we're able to continue at least the level of services that that our citizens expect is critical. So, Lynn, thank you. Thank you very much for your comment. Lisa, do we have one more speaker?
We do. We have Carrie Wilson. Carrie, I am going to have, you're unmuted, so please go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you, Supervisor. And I just echo what everyone has said tonight about this has been really informative. I think you guys have come to the table to really help us understand what you're dealing with. And I just thought I would share, I echo so much of what people have said tonight. Ms. Wood, the way you spoke about the people who are in need in housing. Right now, there's an article up on Washington Post about the food drive that we just held this weekend here in Reston. And it's story after story of the people who've lost jobs at the airport or because they worked in childcare or worked in other businesses that we're talking about. And for many of them, there's just no coming back. Cornerstones has distributed over $2 million in CARES Act assistance in partnership with the Fairfax County, just in our area alone. And it's not all just for people in rental situations. We've written checks for people with mortgages in some of the new housing here in Reston. Everybody has been affected, but most of all, what this has done has put a strain on what was already a system, as Jerry Poggi said earlier, that is not meeting the needs. And I think just as we understand it, as you all work so hard, you've done a terrific job in trying to ensure that resources flowed first to the people in the greatest need. And now as we continue this process of sort of how do we all recover from this and rebuild, just ask you to continue to keep the needs of our everyday workforce, your county employees, frankly, the employees that work with me, my team, who haven't seen increases in their county contracts or grants for many, many years, and yet have been taking on a greater share of the partnership in need. So we know how tough this is. This is really a thank you, but it's also a, you know, yes, hopefully with the additional tax, if that is accepted, as you all look at tax reforms that are desperately going to be needed, how do we take the equity lens that we are applying through One Fairfax and talk about distributing opportunity through the many ways you've done a lot on transportation. So less of a question than a thank you, and just a see we are feeling the pain, but also the gratitude of the community who has been there to support so many of our neighbors during this time.
Carrie, thank you very much. I appreciate your thoughtful comment and flagging flagging really the reality that I think you and Cornerstones are seeing right up front. You know, you're right in the middle of helping folks that that frankly, I know, as you said, this really has taken an existing situation to a whole nother level. And Carrie, I wondered if you might be able to just spend a couple more minutes addressing the issue of how disproportionate the impact that you've seen of the pandemic locally. I mean, because some of us, I mean, I'm in my, my home basement. I still have my job. We're doing fine. My wife's still working. Talk, if you could, a little bit, some of the things that you've seen in terms of the disproportionality of this impact.
Sure. And I think we all realize we've heard a lot about this, but definitely the pandemic has hit people of color, immigrants, absolutely disproportionately. And it is because of where people work, where they had to go to work but didn't have employers who were ensuring that they had the protections they needed. And it was that or their families would starve. We have so many people that are doubled up in housing, not because they want to hurt our neighborhoods, but because they have absolutely no choice. And I'll never forget the time when I was taken on a home visit by one of our case managers who took me to the master bedroom closet where a young woman and her baby were sleeping. That's what they could afford. And that's not right. And that's what we're trying to do. And I know that you and others talked about with the need to build housing that is truly permanently affordable for so many of our workforce. I think what people don't realize is it takes $70,000 a year in this county to be able to afford to live, work here, get to work, pay childcare. So what we're seeing is all of those folks who were in either positions, service related industries, everything you've talked about where people have lost hours at work or lost jobs, everybody is hurting. The only good news as the economy starts to open up is I think there's more opportunity. We were able to secure some funding from the state to help with employment, and hopefully maybe we can help some people, reach beyond that very minimum wage to a true living wage, find new jobs. But the impact has been devastating, and it's what we see in our shelters. Where in a county where 11% of our population, for example, is African American, we are talking about in shelters and juvenile justice and foster care, in jails. We have people 60, 70, 80% African American, other Latino, other populations, because we have made choices in the past that have prevented them from moving out of poverty and away. And so they rely on these systems. So it compounds it. Again, we live in a great county. If you're going to be, who has really invested the resources in its partners, we have incredible supporters, but I think it is up to us now to look ahead to the next 10 years and say, how are we going to double down and ensure opportunity, not just for the families here today, but for their children and youth who need our support.
Carrie, thank you. Thank you very much. I know with the work you do and and with your heart, I know this was something that you could really speak to, and I certainly, and hopefully the others listening in, appreciated you sharing those insights. So, and let's all do what we can, right, Carrie? So,
great.
Thank you. Okay, Lisa, do we have anyone else, or I don't see anyone else's hand up, I don't think.
No, I don't see any new hands up.
Okay, well, with that then, let's go ahead and wrap up. Did want to just thank everybody for participating tonight. There were some links put in the chat, I believe. If you have additional thoughts, don't be shy. Feel free to, again, speak at the public hearings that are countywide, scheduled the 13th through the 15th of April. Also, feel free to contact my office, either at huntermill@fairfaxcounty.gov or 703-478-0283. And I look forward to getting additional feedback from all of you on these budget issues and beyond, including a number of the topics that were discussed tonight. Christina, thank you very much. Appreciate all the great work that you and the team do at the Office of Management and Budget, or the department rather. So thank you very much. And just so everybody understands, whenever things happen at the board level on the budget, don't blame Christina, blame the board, because we're the ones who are ultimately responsible for it. And it's the wonderful work that Christina and her team does that allows us to hopefully make the right decisions and be good stewards for the county. So thank you, everybody, tonight. Appreciate everybody's patience, and everyone continue to stay healthy and stay out there. And thank you very much. Have a good evening, everybody.